Nobody really prepares you for what midlife actually is. Not the version they sell you. Not the jokes about sports cars and crisis. The real thing. The actual interior experience of arriving in the middle of your life and realizing that some of what you were told was never quite true. And some of what you told yourself was something you really needed to stop believing. I want to talk about the thing people avoid. Not because it's comfortable, but because I think avoiding it is costing men something real. And here it is. Midlife is not a crisis, but it is a confrontation. A confrontation with the distance between the life you imagined and the life you actually built. Between the man you intended to become and the man who shows up in the mirror. Between the things that were supposed to matter by now and the things that actually do. And most men, when they start to feel the edges of that confrontation, they back away from it. They keep busy. They numb it. They manage it. Because the confrontation feels like a failure. And I don't want to talk about why it isn't. And what actually is. I want to talk about something else. And here is what I want to talk about. It is what I see in men at midlife. A particular combination of things that almost never gets named accurately. On the surface, fine. Career established. Life constructed. Responsibilities managed. Underneath, something more complicated. A failure that isn't just physical. A restlessness that doesn't go away with a weekend off. A quiet question that surfaces in the still moments and refuses to be satisfied with the usual answers. And the man carrying all of this usually has no framework for it, no language that fits. Because the culture around man gives you two options for midlife. You're either thriving, in which case you don't talk about it, or you're having a crisis, in which case it's treated as embarrassment. There's no space for the third thing. The honest, unglamorous, genuinely difficult experience of being a man in the middle of his life, asking real questions with no clear answers. That space barely exists. And so, most men carry it alone. But here is the strange part. The thing that nobody talks about. The brutal part that the title of this video promised isn't the difficulty of midlife. It's how unnecessary so much of the difficulty is. Not the difficulty of life itself. That's real. Loss is real. Aging is real. Limitations are real. But there's a specific kind of suffering at midlife that isn't caused by circumstance. It's caused by the story. The story a man has been telling himself about what his life is supposed to look like, what success is supposed to feel like, what a man his age is supposed to have figured out by now. And that story, the invisible, inherited, never quite examined story, creates a standard that almost no life can meet. And the gap between that standard and reality is where most of the pain lives. Pain, most of it, lives there, not in the actual life, in the comparison between the life and the story. Most men never notice this distinction. They feel the pain and assume something is wrong with the life, when actually something is wrong with the story. Let me make it more concrete. Most men arrive at midlife carrying a definition of success that was handed to them before they were old enough to question it. Achieve this, earn this, become this, hit these markers by this age. And that definition was useful once. It gave you direction, kept you moving. But here is what nobody told you about it. It was designed for someone else's idea of a life, not yours specifically. It was assembled from cultural expectations, from your father's generation, from what got rewarded, from the metrics that were legible to people around you. And you built your life, partly in response to it. Which means the life you built was partly organized around an external template rather than your own actual values. And this is where things become interesting, because at midlife the template starts to crack. Not because you failed to meet it, because sometimes because you succeeded. You built the thing. You achieved the markers and stood inside the finished structure, waiting to feel what you were promised. And the feeling either didn't come, or it came and didn't last. And that, the gap between the promise and the reality, is the one of the most disorienting things a man can experience. Because it doesn't just challenge what he built, it challenges why he built it. And something changes after 40 that makes this harder to ignore. The tolerance for self-deception drops. When you're younger, it's easier to stay slightly ahead of the uncomfortable questions. The momentum of building keeps them at a distance. But after 40, and I've felt this, and I've watched it in other men, the capacity for comfortable numbness start to thin. The strategies that used to work, the busyness, the alcohol, the constant forward motion, they still function, but they work less well. The questions break through more easily. The still moments feel longer. The gap between the surface and what's underneath becomes harder to maintain. Most men never notice this as a feature. They experience it as a malfunction. But it's not. It's the psyche doing something important, insisting that certain things get looked at, refusing to let the examination be deferred indefinitely. So, here is the brutal truth. Not brutal in a cruel way. Brutal in the way that real things are brutal. Simply, cleanly true. Most men spend the first half of their lives building a version of themselves that was designed to be impressive to other people. Not consciously, not cynically, just as the natural result of growing up in a world that rewards certain performances and ignores almost everything else. And it works. The performance lands. People approve. The metrics get hit. But there's a cost. And the cost is this. Somewhere in all that building for an audience, the private self, the part of you that exists, when no one is watching and nothing needs to be proven, that self gets very little room, very little attention, very little development. And at midlife, that private self starts to make noise, not loudly. Men's inner lives rarely make loud noise. Just persistently. That low hum, that background arch, the sense that something important is missing, even when everything looks complete from the outside. And the brutal truth is that you can't address it by doing more of what got you here. You can't achieve your way to it. You can't optimize your way to it. You can't manage or outwork or outrun it. You have to turn toward it, which is the direction, the one direction most men are least equipped to go. So let me ask you the question that midlife is always asking, not the surface version, the real one. If you stripped away the roles, the job, the title, the function, who would you be? Not who would you want people to think you are. Not the LinkedIn version or the version you perform at family gatherings. Just you. Your actual values. Your real fears. What genuinely moves you. What you've been quietly ashamed of wanting because you didn't fit the template. Most men haven't spent much time with that question. Not because they are shallow, because they are busy being everything else. And I'm not saying the answer to that question requires you to blow anything up. Most of the time, it doesn't. It just requires honesty. The kind of honesty that says, some of what I've been carrying isn't mine. Some of what I've been chasing isn't mine. Isn't for me. And some of what I've been avoiding is the thing that most needs my attention. That honesty is uncomfortable, but it's also the most clarifying thing available to a man at midlife. The brutal truth about midlife is that it's an audit, not a punishment, not a crisis, an audit. Life presents you with the accumulated results of 20 or 25 years of choices and asks you with a directness he couldn't muster when you were younger, whether those choices actually reflected who you are. And the answer for most men is some did. Some choices were genuinely yours, built for something real. And some were borrowed, inherited, performed, made in response to pressure that were real but didn't actually represent your values. Midlife is where you get to see the difference. And what you do with that seeing, that's the actual work. Not only reinvention, not throwing out what you built, just a gradual, honest, quiet realignment, moving toward more of what's true and less of what was simply expected. That's not a small thing. For some men, it turns out to be the most important thing they ever do. I think the reason nobody talks about this honestly is that it's easier to make midlife into a punchline than to sit with what it's actually asking. The punchline keeps it at a distance, but the men who do sit with it, who let the confrontation happen without backing away, they tend to come out of it different. Not younger, not more certain, just more themselves. less performance, less borrowed identity, more honest about what matters, and less apologetic about it. And I think that specific, hard-won quality is what the second half of a man's life is supposed to be built on. Not the template, not the story someone else handed you. Something you actually own.